Chapter 1. Outstanding Citizen Matthew and the Bloody Necromancer. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Gold Digger Basin. Rolling Stone Town. Spring. A robin with blue feathered back and yellow feathered chest flapped its wings and flew up from the lawn in front of the city hall. Over a few chimneys and red brick roofs. It landed deftly on an oak tree surrounded by many red and yellow walls. There were insects crawling on the branches directly below. The robin was about to pounce. But suddenly, a roar came from the translucent glass window behind it. Bugs quickly shook off the branches. The birds also flew away in a panic. All that remained were the 5 well-dressed humans behind the glass window on the second floor who were still arguing. "I disagree." The plump middle-aged woman, Liz, slapped away the wooden board in front of her that had the words "Outstanding Citizen Selection" engraved on it. Then, she turned to the bald man on the left. "Howard is a complete hooligan and scum. Not only does he like to hook up with married women. He even likes to seduce married men. He always took advantage of the time when women went shopping to look for their men. I've seen it with my own eyes dozens of times." Dozens of times. BDNV. The more Liz spoke, the more excited she became. Her saliva sprayed onto half the table. The 4 men couldn't help but shrink back. "Calm down, Liz." The bald man comforted her. "This is just a nomination." Liz's attitude was unusually firm. "He can't even get nominated. Howard is terrible." As she spoke, her slender eyes looked around and suddenly seemed to have discovered something. "Could it be that one of you has been hooked up with him?" The 4 men trembled and denied in unison, "No." The bald man tore the recommendation letter in his hand into pieces. The committee unanimously rejected Howard Rosa's nomination. Anyone who had worked in City Hall for more than a week knew how scary Liz's mouth was. She was the walking gossip board. If one were unlucky enough to make it into her gossip knowledge, then the whole town would know about this rumor tomorrow morning. Everyone present was a respectable person. They could not afford to be slandered. Then, the last candidate to be nominated is Mr. Matthew from the Mage District. He had just lived in Rolling Stone Town for 2.5 years, and he met the criteria for an outstanding citizen. His day job was as a history teacher at Seaver Public School, and the students all liked him. He also had a part-time job at the Public Security Bureau, and Captain Blake had a high opinion of him. According to the person who recommended him, Mr. Matthew is kind, warm, and generous. He doesn't have many friends in Rolling Stone Town and is always alone. The reason for this is that he's too busy to make friends. The bald man didn't finish his sentence. A gentleman on Liz's left raised an objection. "Mr. Chairman, a recluse does not meet the criteria for an outstanding citizen." The bald man nodded slightly. "Don't worry, Richard." According to the reference, Mr. Matthew had planted nearly 1,000 oak trees in Rolling Stone Town in 2.5 years, which had greatly greened the town's environment. The oak tree outside the window and the 3 trees in front of the city hall were all thanks to Mr. Matthew. In addition, Captain Blake of the Public Security Bureau had given a statement. The person of reference felt that Mr. Matthew had made an indelible contribution to the public security and environment of Rolling Stone Town and deserved to receive this year's Outstanding Citizen Award. Everyone listened. They couldn't help but glance outside the glass window. Was this tree planted 2 years ago? Why do I feel that it has always been there? Richard, who was dressed like a gentleman, muttered. "It seems to be. I have an impression of it." Matthew was a tall, thin, handsome, and shy young man. Liz looked nostalgic. "This is indeed an outstanding contribution." Another man reminded them, "But the most important criteria for the selection is whether they can get along with other citizens." The bald man nodded. "It's usually so, but the owner of this recommendation letter doesn't seem to write anonymous letters often." She accidentally added her own name at the end. Richard clapped his hands hard. The recommendation violated the rules. We will directly reject this. Alright, Rolling Stone Town still didn't have any outstanding citizens who could be nominated this year, just like the past 3 years. The rest of the people either shrugged or spread their hands, tacitly agreeing to this outcome. But at this moment, the bald man said, it was signed by Sif Suki. Suki. It was the surname of the Lord of Rolling Stone Town. Sif Suki was the only daughter of the Lord of Rolling Stone Town. The room was silent for 2 to 3 seconds. Even the most picky Liz raised her hands. Let's skip the nomination round. I support Matthew to become an outstanding citizen. The others all agreed. However, before the bald man could finish his sentence, he slowly pulled out an old paper from the bottom of the pile of documents. There's one last question. This is the registration form that Matthew handed to the municipal government 2 years ago. It clearly states his origin and profession as an adventurer. I wonder if he wrote it wrong. According to my observations, what he had done in Rolling Stone Town over the years had nothing to do with his profession and even contradicted it. However, if what was registered on this piece of paper was true, I'm afraid he'll miss out on our generous reward for being an outstanding citizen. What profession? Isn't he just an ordinary mage? Everyone curiously went over to take a look. The first thing they saw was a sketch of a smiling face. Chapter 2. Outstanding Citizen and Bloody Necromancer. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In the class column below, the word Necromancer was written on it. Wow! Someone exclaimed. If it's a necromancer, then it really won't work. I remember that the Lord hates necromancers the most. Richard said seriously, but this might be a misunderstanding. How about this? I'll talk to Matthew after work. The bald man nodded. Then I'll leave it to you. Also, do the assessment work. To be honest, I don't believe it either. In the evening, north of Rolling Stone Town, in the newly formed oak forest, a tall and thin figure was busy. Matthew held a shovel in his hand and filled the newly dug pit with a thin layer of mature soil. There were a few small sacks on the ground beside him. One of the sacks contained a sapling, and the rest were empty. In the next moment, he planted the sapling into the pit. He covered it with several layers of soil of different textures. After the transplant, Matthew took out a bottle of green liquid and poured it on the soil near the seedling. Light green light waves surged. It was obvious that the seedlings had grown a lot. Its posture also became more resilient. You have successfully planted an oak tree. Your nature affinity has slightly increased. The accumulated number of oak trees planted and survived. 996. I'm still short of 4 trees. I'll definitely have enough by tomorrow. He looked at the sky. Matthew decided to rest and go home. Just like usual. He checked the contents of the mission panel again. Main mission. Plant trees, description. In the vicinity of Rolling Stone Town, choose a type of tree to plant on a large scale. Please proceed with this mission under the premise of ensuring the survival rate. No time limit, beginner target. 1,000 trees, basic reward. Undead summoning, bone dragon, large amount of XP, putting aside the rewards. If this quest were given to a druid, it would be normal. But the problem was, Matthew was very sure that he was a necromancer who had a strong foundation. After all, it was written clearly on the character panel. Name: Matthew, class. Level 5 Necromancer, attributes. Strength 10/agility 14/constitution 11/intelligence 15/intuition 15/charm 16, characteristic. Necromancer/fear harvest, abilities. Spellcasting/scroll/general knowledge, necromancy and magic, /insight/medicine/nature's gift/summon undead creatures, contract. 1/3 / rotten sack understanding, spell. I shouldn't have opted for dual skills at the beginning. He looked at the nondescript yet frivolous game system. Matthew's emotions were complicated. He remembered it very clearly. On the eve of his transmigration, he had been slaying the mud monsters in the Forest of Decay on his computer. He was rocking 2 classes back then. The 2 classes were Druid and Necromancer. In the end, he transmigrated in the next second. He became a Necromancer. Immediately after, Matthew found something even more confusing. After transmigrating, he had a game system. However, there seemed to be a problem with the system. In the game he played, the system names of different classes were different. The Necromancer's system was called the Path of Undying. The Druid system was called Nature's Heart. However, in Matthew's transmigrated system, it was all a bunch of garbled characters and codes. Among the characters, he could barely make out the words, undying, natural, and there were countless watermarks of the other stacked on top of each other. It made people dizzy. Matthew felt numb. Fortunately, the system quickly stabilized. At the same time, he was given his first main mission. That was to plant trees in Rolling Stone Town. Matthew, who had just arrived and had no family, had no reason to refuse. He started working diligently. This job lasted for almost 3 years. In the Mage area. Outside an elegant and ancient 2-story residential building. Matthew stopped at the door. He did not immediately open the gate. Instead, he looked at the alley opposite. Someone was waiting for him. Mr. Matthew. A young girl with a youthful aura ran out of the alley. The 2 guards behind her hesitated for a moment but did not move. The pretty girl jogged to Matthew. The sky was already dark. Matthew could still see the deep blush on her face. Bina. Matthew replied. Matthew, I'm going to Jade Court next week. Father wants me to go over and learn dance and art. I came to see you before I left. The girl lowered her eyes. Matthew nodded. Jade Court is a good place. Seeing that the girl didn't react, he added, the Wood Elves are good at singing and dancing. Their artistic taste is indeed above that of humans. The girl still lowered her head. Matthew could only say, remember to write to me when you go to Jade Court so that I can reply to you. The young girl's eyes finally had some liveliness. She raised her head slightly. Her big eyes were filled with anticipation. I will. Matthew, can you hug me before you leave? Matthew said awkwardly, I'm afraid that won't do. The young girl had already taken the initiative to hug him. Her soft body pressed against Matthew's chest. He could feel the rapid heartbeat. I like you, Matthew. Bina boldly confessed. Matthew let her hug him for a while. Then, he gently pushed her away. Then, he kindly reminded her, Bina, you're still young. You don't know what true love is. Even if you take 10,000 steps back, you've only seen the surface of me. You don't know the real me. Bina retorted excitedly, I know you. I've been secretly looking at you every day in class. I know everything you do. You are a good person. You love plants so much, and you love life. There's no man better than you in Rolling Stone Town. I have reservations about this point of view. Ah, I'm sorry to disturb you, but official business is more important. A man's voice suddenly came from the other side of the room. Bina blushed. She quickly hid behind Matthew. Then, Matthew saw a man dressed like a gentleman walking over quickly. Mr. Matthew, I'm Richard from the 5-member committee of the City Hall. Regarding the outstanding citizen selection, I have an urgent message for you to confirm. This is the information you registered at the City Hall 2 years ago. Is this your profession? Is there a mistake? Matthew took the document from Richard and glanced at it. Then, he said with unusual determination, "There is no mistake. As you can see, I am indeed a necromancer." Richard was stunned. "This doesn't make sense. You don't look like a necromancer." Bina also snorted. "I don't believe it. You must be talking nonsense on purpose." Matthew's expression was normal. In the next moment, he suddenly snapped his fingers in the direction of his home. Not long after, the kitchen door was pushed open from the inside. A tall shadow walked out from inside and came to the garden outside. Richard and Bina widened their eyes. It was a 2-meter tall towering skeleton. As they walked, the skeleton greeted them. "Hey, Matthew, this is rare. Do we have any guests tonight?" Matthew shook his head. "I don't think so." He looked at Bina and Richard, who were dumbfounded. "I'm sorry to startle you, but I must say. It seems that you don't understand me, nor do you understand necromancers. Good night. Goodbye, both of you." At night, the thick aroma of mushroom soup filled the dining room and kitchen. Matthew and the towering skeleton sat opposite each other and enjoyed their dinner. "What a pity, Matthew," Skeleton said regretfully, "you really shouldn't have let me show my face in public. This time, not only did you lose the selection of outstanding citizens, but you also might have lost the admiration of an innocent girl. No matter how you look at it, it's a loss." Matthew drank a mouthful of mushroom soup and looked satisfied. "I don't care," the skeleton asked with interest. "Then what do you care about? Let's do it in stages. At this stage, I just want to plant trees properly." "Pa." Matthew gently put down the bowl. "Peggy, go to the greenhouse and prepare the saplings I need tomorrow. I'm going to the basement to meditate." The skeleton cried out, "Why should I go? I've been working for 72 hours straight. I was the one who made the dinner of love just now. I'm so tired." Matthew calmly replied, "You're a skeleton, Peggy. You won't get tired. In addition, I only have you as my contract summon. I don't trust the other skeletons to do these things." Peggy couldn't refuse. She could only curse as she walked into the greenhouse on the east side. Damn necromancers. Chapter 3. Undead Summoning Spell. Bone Dragon. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The next day, Matthew woke up early. Today was Saturday. He didn't need to go to Seaver Public School during the day. It was just the right time to complete the final mission target. He carried a few bags of saplings from the greenhouse and hurried out. Peggy was indeed meticulous. In addition to the things needed for planting, she also placed lunch boxes and water bags on the shelf next to the sapling bag. This meant that she not only guessed that Matthew was going to do a big job today but also guessed that he would probably forget to get food from the kitchen. Such attentiveness was a miracle for a low-level undead creature. Sometimes, Matthew felt that it was not impossible for Peggy to plant trees for him. But he was only thinking about it. Although Rolling Stone Town was not a remote place where magic was extinct, and necromancers were far from being hated by everyone in the world of Ainder, a walking skeleton would always attract many strange gazes. Not to mention that Peggy was a rare skeleton transformed from a dead tauren. Skeleton planting trees would definitely attract all kinds of criticism in a small place like Rolling Stone Town. It was troublesome just thinking about it. North of the oak forest, Matthew walked steadily as he surveyed the land ahead. He was choosing a location for the saplings. Planting trees was never an easy task. Seed selection, germination, foundation soil allocation, fixed planting in greenhouse, tree pit selection, transplantation and maintenance, this series of steps had been memorized by Matthew in the past 3 years. However, there were all kinds of problems that needed to be solved in practice. For example, right now, Matthew had already prepared the saplings and tools, but he was unable to start work because of the difficulty of selecting a site. Rolling Stone Town is really not a good place to plant trees. He looked at the billowing black smoke coming from the west. Matthew sighed. The Gold Digger Basin was famous for its various mines. The land here had been dug up several times by humans and kobolds, and most of the places were not suitable for plants to live. Man-made pollution was one thing. What was even more terrifying was the huge scar in the north. Matthew stood on top of a mound and looked north. It's getting closer. He looked at the black scar that was spreading from the north with a complicated expression. Scar of the dead. It was a scar left on the earth by a natural disaster many years ago. It started from Jewel Bay in the east, passed through Jade Court and Eversong Forest, and extended to the Duke's Territory and Gold Digger Basin of the human kingdoms. Near the scar of the dead, life force was extinguished. Even undead creatures found it difficult to survive. It was the purest and most brutal power of extermination. Mortals couldn't fight it. There are many similarities between this world and the game world, but there are also many differences. There was no scar of the dead in the game world, and I have never heard of Rolling Stone Town and Jade Court. Could I be in the same game universe but not in the same plane? He retracted his gaze. Matthew walked down the hill. Behind him was the oak forest that was gradually taking shape. In front of him was a barren land, and behind the oak forest was Rolling Stone Town with red roofs and yellow bricks. The three regions were clearly separated. Sometimes, Matthew felt that the mission issued by the system might be related to the scar of the dead. Because the more he looked at the oak forest, the more it seemed like a shield in front of the scar of the dead. It was a pity. Just relying on an oak forest won't be enough to stop the scar of the dead from spreading. He thought casually. Matthew walked around the hill. He finally found a few suitable pits. Although this place was beyond his planned location, it was still a distance away from the scar of the dead. The oak saplings planted here might be able to survive. Limited by his physique and strength, Matthew could not be considered swift and decisive in his work, but he was more experienced. He maintained a certain rhythm and speed. Until the sun rises high in the sky, the saplings in the sacks had settled down at the foot of the hill. Matthew wiped his sweat, took out a bottle of green liquid from his pocket, and sprinkled it on the oak seedlings one by one. This was the green growth liquid that he had asked someone to buy from the druids of the Guardian Highland at a high price. It had the effect of accelerating and consolidating plants. If the plant were watered constantly, it would have 20 years of natural growth in a year. Unfortunately, this was the last bottle Matthew had. These 3 years. Matthew had invested almost all of his savings into the vigorous planting of trees. Now, it was finally time to reap the rewards. His hands trembled slightly. Puff. Drops of green liquid fell. The small sapling that had been wilting just a moment ago instantly flourished. At that moment, Matthew's eyes also lit up. Successfully planted 5 oak trees. Your nature affinity has slightly increased. Accumulated number of oak trees planted and survived. 1001, you have completed the primary objective of the main mission. Plant trees. You have received the reward Undead Summoning, Bone Dragon, and Massive XP. You have leveled up to level 8. Unable to continue level up, remaining XP has been accumulated, please upgrade as soon as possible. Your Undead Summoning spell has been leveled up to level 8, and a contract slot has been added. Your intelligence +1, your perception +1, you have obtained a new ability, Instant Summoning. You have obtained a new ability, Fixed Drop. Your ability, Rotten Sack Understanding, has been upgraded to Rotten Sack Mastery. You can now learn higher level spells. A dense stream of information flashed past Matthew's eyes. A huge sense of satisfaction surged into his heart. The increase in attributes and abilities did not exceed Matthew's expectations. However, in terms of experience, he still had some left after leveling up 3 times. This was much more than the amount of experience he gained from the necromancy meditation every day. However, what Matthew valued the most was still the Bone Dragon summon. Undead summoning, Bone Dragon. You can summon a Bone Dragon to serve you at any time. Remark. This Bone Dragon is no higher than level 15. Contract status. Contracted, it's actually in a contracted state. I even saved myself a contract slot. Matthew was very satisfied. Summoning was a necromancer's specialty, and it would increase with the level. Every 2 levels of profession's advancement would result in an additional contract slot. This was used to summon a specific creature. The necromancer needed less mana to summon the contracted subjects. The tacit understanding between the two sides was also higher. As time passed, some necromancers would even develop feelings for their contracted subjects. Kobold Mine. In a hidden underground cave. Matthew held the withered wood staff and tried to summon the Bone Dragon for the first time. An incantation sounded. With the support of the new ability, Instant Summoning, when the first syllable came out of Matthew's mouth, the dark cave flashed with a reverse hexagram array pointing to the negative energy plane. Grayish-white bone powder and dark green fire floated from the void like snowflakes. Matthew looked over. A giant skeleton beast that was mostly submerged in the darkness was lying there warily. A deep blue soul flame lit up inside the skull of the skeletal dragon. It stared coldly at Matthew. Matthew was a little nervous under its gaze. The air was constantly filled with the sound of the wind in the cave. The man and the dragon were in a stalemate. Matthew's muscles were abnormally tense. This was the first time he had faced a monster that was twice his level. The contract he had formed made him immune to the faint dragon's might. However, the immense pressure from its body and the fear brought by its terrifying image could not be ignored. It's no wonder that people are always prejudiced against necromancers. The subjects in the field of necromancy are scarier than the last. How many people can face this fear? Matthew adjusted his state of mind. He waved his withered wooden staff and ordered the skeletal dragon, "Bow your head." The skeletal dragon's movements were slow but firm. Its long neck slowly circled around the rocks and ceiling of the karst cave. Then, it landed steadily on the ground in front of Matthew. Its lower jaw was pressed against the ground. The blue soul fire was jumping. For some reason, Matthew actually felt a trace of nervousness from the spiritual fire of the behemoth in front of him. Matthew was amused. The skeletal dragon was nervous, but he wasn't. He mustered his courage and stepped on the skeletal dragon's head. The latter made a whimpering sound, appearing very docile. Matthew was relieved. He bent down and touched the bone dragon's bones. It was dry. It was also very rough. At a glance, it was obvious that it was not an expensive bone. "When we have money, we will definitely get you a new set of bones," Matthew couldn't help but say. The bone dragon let out a low groan. "The loyalty of Philolius, Bone Dragon, to you has increased to 85. Matthew was amused. So easily satisfied. Then I should make more promises. The skeletal dragon slowly raised its head. It lifted Matthew up. Matthew was able to look down at the cave from a higher angle. This place was originally a paradise for gold diggers. Later, when the mines were exhausted and idle, it was occupied by a kobold tribe. After the Suki family took over Rolling Stone Town, the local lord issued several orders to expel the kobolds. Under the hunting of the surrounding adventurers and mercenaries, the area gradually became silent and deserted. As far as Matthew knew, there were many similar karst caves in the Gold Digger Basin. These karst caves were complicated. Rumor had it that some of the karst caves were even connected to the vast underground world. That was also where the kobolds had truly retreated. Matthew rarely set foot in these areas. However, the size of the bone dragon was too big. Even the underground karst cave could not accommodate it. One could imagine how big a storm it would cause if it appeared on the surface. He was a low-key and pragmatic person. He had never intended to hide his identity as a necromancer. However, he did not want to cause trouble for no reason. In the future, I'll just stay in the cave with Philolius. He thought about it. Matthew carefully examined the skeletal dragon's body. He also checked his stats. Name: Philolius, race: Bone Dragon, LV 15, attributes: Strength 24/Agility 10/Constitution 17/Intelligence 4/Will 10/Charm 14, characteristics: Blind, 60 feet, /immune to acid /immune to cold /sensory sensitivity /undead creature, ability: Flattery /first attack /undead dragons might / sweep tail. Flattery. Matthew realized it later. Was he trying to flatter me just now? It was as if it was to confirm Matthew's thoughts. The bone dragon's bubbling sounds came from beneath his feet again. Coupled with the emotions transmitted by the leaping soul fire, this was definitely flattery. Diovico, the image of a strong man that Matthew had just built up because he thought the bone dragon was in awe of him, instantly disappeared. He could not help but stomp his feet. Your name is too difficult to pronounce. I'll call you, Phile. Philolius was at a loss for a moment. Immediately after, its soul fire began to tremble violently. Waves of joy surged through the contract. In appreciation of your name, the loyalty of Philolius, Bone Dragon, to you has increased to 90. Perhaps it was too happy. Phile's head shook too much. Matthew was almost thrown off by it. Fortunately, his perception and agility were both extraordinary. He did a small, elegant jump. Matthew landed steadily in the shadows of the cave. But at that moment, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. He turned around and looked in the direction where he had landed. He stepped on a piece of clothing covered in blood. Chapter 4. A gift from nature. You are listening at novelfull.audio. You have used your ability, Insight. Judging from its size and design, it originally belonged to a woman or a short man. The bloodstains on the clothes had dried up a long time ago. Nearby, a string of messy footprints leads to a cave. The footprints are deep and big, definitely not a kobold or a gnoll. A footprint left by a human, a bear gnome, or a half-orc. He noted down this information. Matthew meticulously put on his gloves and took away the bloody clothes. Then, he prepared to leave. The terrain of the underground cave was extremely complicated, and it was not something that a small necromancer like him could explore alone. Although the bone dragon was fierce. However, its size was not suitable for the cave. The passage in front of Matthew could barely accommodate 2 people. Phile definitely wouldn't be able to get through. Furthermore, it was obvious that this had happened a few days ago. Matthew thought that handing blood robes over to the security office was the best choice. The Suki family was one of the few nobles who placed great importance on the security of their territory. This was a well-known fact among the human kingdoms. If someone had really gone missing recently, the Public Security Bureau would not sit idly by. They left the cave. Matthew quickly returned to the city. Along the way, he realized that the main mission had changed. Main mission: plant trees, progress. Beginner goal achieved, follow-up mission 1. Keep up the good work. Description: please continue to expand the oak forest in Rolling Stone Town. Target 3,000 trees. Reward: 10 XP per 1 surviving oak tree, follow-up mission 2. Maintenance is important too. Description: a new forest is easily destroyed by an accident. Please protect your forest well. Reward: different rewards for each successful protection event, 10 experience points for every oak tree. Matthew's eyes lit up. Wasn't this more exciting than fighting and killing? There was no risk in planting trees. As for protection, Matthew didn't care too much. Ever since the kobolds disappeared, the security of Rolling Stone Town had been very good. The bloody clothes in the karst cave should be an accident, probably related to those restless adventurers. My oak forest is planted on private land. No one would dare to secretly cut down trees, right? Matthew thought. Other than the two follow-up missions. Matthew didn't know when, but a symbol similar to Taiji had appeared at the bottom of the mission bar. The symbol was divided into left and right, and the shape of both sides was exactly the same. They were both similar to transparent three-dimensional commas. The difference was the color of the light spots surging inside. The left side was gray, and there was only a trace of it at the bottom. On the right side was green, and a large number of light spots were rolling inside. They had already accumulated to about half. What was this? Matthew stared at it for a while. He found that the green light spots were slowly increasing. Especially when he passed by the oak forest, the speed of the light spots increasing seemed to be faster. The gray dot on the left was not moving at all. There was no note on the mission panel. However, he guessed that it might be related to the Necromancer and Druid classes. What happens when the light spots are full? Are there so many green spots because I planted so many trees? If I summon a few more undead or use negative energy spells, will I be able to increase the number of gray spots? Along the way, Matthew studied it with great interest. However, when he was about to reach the town, the appearance of an uninvited guest interrupted his thoughts. Hee. The laughter of a human girl sounded. Matthew's eyes lit up with a faint white light. He steadied himself. A thumb-sized elf with wings on her back flew out of the white light. She enthusiastically flew around Matthew 3 times, then shook the mini flower basket in her hand. A large handful of fresh fruits fell into Matthew's arms. Then, a white light flashed. The other party disappeared without a trace. Your ability, Gift of Nature, is in effect. You have obtained a large bunch of raspberries. Raspberry. A sweet, crispy, and nutritious fruit with the blessing of fairies. After consumption, it can increase a little energy and has a slight purifying effect. My luck today is pretty good. When he saw the object in his arms, Matthew's slightly nervous expression temporarily relaxed. That was an oak tree fairy. They were the companions of the oak forest. The fairies appeared when the oak forest reached 500 trees. In order to express their gratitude and love for Matthew, they would send things over every few days. Most of the fruits gifted by the oak fairies were of extraordinary quality, but the problem was that these little fairies were mischievous by nature, and pranks were almost engraved in their blood. The last time she sent something to Matthew, he was still in class. In the end, in front of more than 10 children, a naughty oak fairy threw him a few pieces of women's underwear. Matthew almost couldn't explain himself. He couldn't possibly tell his students that this was a gift from nature, right? Fortunately, most of the time, the fairies still abided by their duties. Matthew did not argue with them. Chewing on the sweet raspberries, he quickened his pace. At the intersection 2 blocks away from the security office, he bumped into an anxious Blake. It was a burly, bearded young man. Matthew, I was just about to look for you. Blake was delighted to see Matthew. Matthew's heart skipped a beat. Did something happen? Blake nodded quickly. The farmers in the east found a merchant who was intercepted and killed on the road. His body has just been sent to the town. I need your help. Matthew said without hesitation, let's go. The two of them rushed in the direction of the security office. Blake was the garrison captain of the Public Security Bureau. He was also one of the few people in Rolling Stone Town who knew Matthew's profession. In order to save money for the planting business, Matthew not only applied for a job as a history teacher at Seaver Public School but also part-time as a corpse consultant at the Public Security Bureau. As everyone knew, the Call of the Dead was the most basic necromancy spell. It could capture the souls of the recently deceased for interrogation. With Matthew's support, the Security Bureau's case-solving rate skyrocketed. Time passed. The residents of the territory knew that Blake from the security office was a god when it came to solving cases, so they rarely caused trouble. It could be seen that Matthew had played a big role in the public security of Rolling Stone Town. A moment later. In the morgue of the Public Security Bureau. In front of Matthew stood a ghost with a reserved and blank expression. "Who killed you?" Blake asked skillfully. The ghost pondered. "It's a man with disheveled hair. He's very, very tall." Blake frowned. "Why did he want to kill you?" The ghost shook his head. "I don't know either. That day I came back from Giliu City to buy goods. Because I drank some wine, I went the wrong way. When I woke up, I was already near the ghost castle. I saw a group of people singing and dancing there. There were also many ghosts flying above their heads. It was a terrible scene, those ghosts." As he spoke, his entire body began to tremble. He could not even maintain his spirit body form. Matthew hurriedly interrupted and reminded, "Don't be afraid. You're also a ghost now." The ghost said woodenly, "Oh. Do you remember anything else? Is there any information that you can provide us?" Blake seized the opportunity to ask. The ghost shook his head. "I don't know either. That day, I came back from Giliu City with some goods. It was a terrible scene, those ghosts." Blake and Matthew looked at each other helplessly. Ghosts were like this. Most of them only had a small amount of memories from when they were alive, and most of them were memories with strong emotions. Other than these, no matter what question you asked him, he would only repeat some memory fragments. This was also the limitation of the Call of the Dead. Blake tried to ask another question. After confirming that there was no way to pry more useful information from the ghost's mouth, he sighed. He signaled Matthew to remove the spell with his eyes. Before Matthew could do anything, the ghost actually looked over. "Wait, am I really dead?" Blake said sympathetically, "I'm very sorry." The ghost sighed and said, "What a pity, after I die, my wife will definitely take the family property and take the child to find another merchant to marry. I'm afraid she won't carefully choose a suitable burial place for me." Blake did not know how to answer for a moment. "Can you bury my body in the oak forest north of town? There was no need for a coffin. You could just bury me. I quite like oak trees. The last time I passed by, I seemed to have heard little girls chattering and quarreling. According to my grandmother, I believes I bumped into a flower fairy. This is my only wish." As he spoke, his spirit body gradually faded away. Before Blake could speak, Matthew agreed. "Sure. Thank you." The ghost disappeared. Blake looked at Matthew hesitantly. Matthew spread his hands and thought, "Master Ronan won't mind." Blake touched his head. All right, do as you please. It's your forest anyway. However, this corpse will only be handed over to you tomorrow. There are still some necessary inspections and procedures tonight." Matthew nodded. He took the opportunity to tell Blake about his discovery in the underground cave. Blake's expression was abnormally serious after hearing this. "I understand. I'll arrange for someone to ask around. You have to be careful too, Matthew. Don't wander outside the town alone in the future. I've been feeling a little uneasy recently. Oh right, remember to collect this month's allowance. I've applied for double for you." Matthew narrowed his eyes. "That's what I like to hear." Tonight's main dish was matsutake pilaf. The side dishes were cabbage egg soup and a few slices of bacon. The taste was amazing. Matthew licked the bottom of the bowl clean. Finally. He could not help but praise, "Peggy, your cooking is amazing. Even among the living, you are second to none. As the saying goes in my hometown, the person who marries you is blessed." The towering skeleton was a little embarrassed by the praise. "No. I do this everything. Besides, I'm already dead, so I can't get married." After a while, she saw that Matthew was still immersed in the delicious food. Therefore, she gathered her courage and asked, "Matthew, look at how well I've done. Are you going to give me a raise?" Matthew skillfully wiped his mouth and stood up. "Next time." His figure quickly disappeared into the basement passage. "Damn necromancers!" the Minotaur skeleton roared. Matthew pretended not to hear it. He went to the basement and did not start his daily meditation. Instead, he took out a crystal ball that was about to turn gray from the cupboard in the room next to him. Blood robes in the karst cave. The merchant was intercepted and killed. According to the ghost's description, there was an abnormal group of people wandering around the ghost castle. Just like Blake. Matthew also felt a little uneasy. So tonight, he planned to perform divination. Chapter 5. The Art of the Turtling Mage. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The divination failed. Matthew stuffed the crystal ball into the cabinet with a calm expression. This was very normal. He was a necromancer and had no talent for divination. Even though he had always taken time to fiddle with it out of his love for divination over the years. But the result was obviously not satisfactory. He calmed down a little. Matthew finally arrived at the westernmost room in the basement. There were 2 large bookcases here, and magic books were placed on them. He was ready to learn some spells that matched his current level. Matthew was now a level .8 necromancer. However, the spells on his system were still the ones he had learned at level 5. It was time for an update. In Rolling Stone Town. It was not easy to buy a magic book that recorded the principles of magic. Not to mention, it was related to the path of the dead. Fortunately, Matthew was prepared for the problem. He had always asked his friends in Bai Yen City to help him purchase them in advance. In addition to the portion gifted by Great Mage Ronan. The spellbooks in this room were enough to support Matthew's needs until he reached level 10. His gaze swept back and forth between the bookshelves. A moment later, Matthew made a list of spells for himself. This was the spell he was going to learn next. Pseudocide, level 7 spell, can fake death to escape. The Last Dance, level 8 spell, can detonate non-contracted summons. Vampiric Touch, level 6 spell, can absorb life force by touching others to heal oneself. Garcia's Armor 2, level .6 spell, an advanced version of the level .2 spell. Garcia's Armor, physical defense. Thunderblast Sword, level .7 spell, enchants the long sword and gains the special effect of lightning. Strengthened Summoning, level 8 spell, increases the effect of undead summoning. Learning spells was not an easy task for most people. Most mages spent almost half of their time studying and mastering spells. If these 6 spells were taught to other necromancers of the same level, it would take at least 10 months. And this was under the condition of going all out. But Matthew was different. The speed at which he learned spells was in inverse proportion to his talent in divination. He was confident that it would not be a problem for him to finish studying them within 3 months. Next, I have to focus on learning spells. I have to apply for leave from school. Matthew came to the meditation room with a stack of books. It was close to midnight. He was a little sleepy. "Peggy, a cup of coffee." No one responded. So Matthew could only make a cup of black coffee himself. The bitter and mellow taste immediately made him shudder. "I'm energized." Matthew pursed his lips. He casually flipped open a thick book. On the title page, the string of mischievous magic words jumped out. It danced around Matthew's nose. Garcia's armor too. The art of turtling mages, note. Garcia's self-deprecating skill is as good as his skill. I recommend that every mage learn one of Garcia's spells, Ronin, Grand Mage Ronin. I hope that his journey to the astral plane will go smoothly. Matthew smiled. Master Ronin was the greatest benefactor he had met since he transmigrated. Back then, Matthew had just transmigrated and had no idea about this world. Other than the tree-planting mission, he had no clues. However, planting trees also required money, land, and other resources. Matthew had been wandering around Rolling Stone Town for a while, and he was almost down and out to the point where he could not afford to eat. At the crucial moment, Ronin, who happened to pass by, pulled him back. He invited Matthew to his house for dinner and asked him why a spellcaster who studied the path of necromancy did not go to Baiyan City to develop himself but wandered around a place like Rolling Stone Town with no future. Matthew said that his talent in the path of necromancy was mediocre, but he was unwilling to stop there, so he suddenly had an idea. The path of necromancy studies death and life, but most necromancers seem to only care about death and not life, so I want to try it from a different angle. I plan to plant some trees near Rolling Stone Town. It would be best if I could plant a forest. I want to feel the power of life through this move. It might be helpful for my breakthrough in the path of necromancy. This was a lie Matthew made up to get 2 more meals. He didn't expect these words to pique Ronin's interest. At that time, he had expressed his admiration for Matthew's unconventional ideas. Ronin told Matthew he could plant trees on his land. Moreover, the cost of buying seeds and green liquid, Ronin planned to fund half of it. Matthew was flattered. But he still refused Ronin's kindness. He planned to rely on his own strength to buy the seeds. Ronin didn't mind. He wrote a letter of recommendation on the spot, allowing Matthew to go to the Seaver Public School to teach the children of the nobles in the town. Matthew could choose the subjects himself. After that, Ronin also helped Matthew in life, work, and planting trees. Even Matthew's house was provided by Ronin. Later, Matthew found out half of the houses in the Mage District belonged to Ronin. The other half belonged to his wife. Rolling Stone Town was Ronin's hometown, although he spent most of his time in Jewel Bay. However, he was the reason why Rolling Stone Town had not suffered any natural or man-made disasters over the years. As for the great wizard Ronin, Matthew was still grateful. However, he was also very clear about the reason why the other party helped him. It was impossible to cling to Ronin forever. He still had to rely on his own strength to grow truly. Thinking of this, Matthew focused his attention. He began to concentrate on studying spells. The next day, Matthew walked out of the security office, followed by 2 guards. They carried the merchant's body into the oak forest. Matthew skillfully dug a hole and buried him, completing the ghost's wish. Of course, since he was already there, Matthew did not forget to plant 3 oak trees. 30 XP was credited. Matthew was satisfied. In the afternoon, Blake came with the report. He told Matthew the underground cave had already been investigated. He did not find any other clues. The cave was connected to 7 or 8 deep tunnels, which could lead to almost any place in the Gold Digger Basin. Even the best tracking expert could only scratch his head in this situation. This was in line with Matthew's judgment. It also proved that he was right not to investigate recklessly. As for the surroundings of the ghost castle mentioned by the ghost, as that place had declined for many years and was far away in the mountains, it was highly dangerous. Therefore, Blake was still gathering manpower. He promised Matthew that he would inform him as soon as he found anything new. One night a week later, in the basement, versus Boo, a short incantation sounded. Matthew's body was suddenly covered with a layer of thick translucent armor. Your spell, Garcia's Armor 2, has been successfully cast. Physical defense +8, duration. 180 seconds, he had succeeded. He felt the soft and bouncy feeling of being wrapped up everywhere. Matthew was intoxicated. It felt like he was wrapped in a huge piece of jelly. It's not heavy. However, its defense was very high. According to Turtling Mage, Garcia's armor's greatest feature is that it can be stacked on top of each other. Level 1 and 2 can provide 3 and 8 points of armor, respectively. As expected of a Turtling Mage, I like it. Matthew was just about to continue exploring the technique of stacking 2 spells. Suddenly, an illusion appeared before his eyes. At that moment, he seemed to see a corner of the oak forest. The illusion disappeared in an instant. Immediately, a warm current surged into Matthew's heart. He suddenly had some knowledge in his mind. Your ability, Nature's Gift, is in effect. You have gained new abilities, Appraisal and Accountant. Appraisal. You can accurately estimate the value and price of most goods circulating in Jiliu City. Accountant. You have mastered a certain amount of financial knowledge and are qualified for a basic accounting position. Appraisal. Accountant. Matthew was confused. Is this also a gift from nature? He muttered to himself. At this moment, Matthew suddenly remembered. The corner of the oak forest that he had just caught a glimpse of seemed to be the place where he had buried the merchant's body. I buried the body, and nature gave me a part of his ability. This speculation was absurd and even terrifying. But Matthew felt that it was very likely that it was the truth. Do I only need to bury the body, or do I need to fulfill the last wish of the deceased? How many corpses can I bury? Was there a limit to this kind of gift? Would I get a negative ability? Matthew stopped thinking. Everything had to be done in practice. He noticed. In the mission panel, the Tai Chi symbol had changed. The green energy bar on the right side had risen by a large margin, and it looked like it was about to reach 2/3 of the energy bar. This should also be related to the gift just now. There's no rush. Let's take our time and see. Even if there's a shortcut to obtaining the gift, I have to be careful. I can't turn Great Wizard Ronan's land into a mass grave. Matthew's eyes flickered slightly. At this moment, you finally look the part of the evil necromancer. At the basement entrance, Peggy said charmingly as she leaned against the wall. Matthew ignored her coquettish posture. Is dinner ready so early? Paige shook her head. Big Beard is here. He seems to be in a hurry to see you. At the gate of the fence. What is it? Someone kidnapped Sif. Matthew was shocked. Blake nodded hurriedly. Don't make a fuss. I just received the news. The other party asked for a ransom, but the Lord judged that the other party was only stalling for time and thus delaying the rescue. Currently, the Suki clan is secretly gathering people. I had already led my team to Ghost Castle, but I had no choice but to return after receiving such an urgent report. Of course, it was only right. Nothing could compare to Miss Sif's safety. Blake concluded, I'm here to remind you to be careful. There might be more abnormalities happening in the future. You don't have to worry about Miss Sif. Everyone will do their best. With that, he left in a hurry. Matthew frowned. Sif was the only daughter of this generation of the Suki family. She was also his student. Just like Bina. The girls at the school liked Matthew very much. Matthew remembered the last time he saw Sif. The girl even told Matthew that she had written an anonymous letter to the city hall, recommending him to be this year's outstanding citizen. Later, the people from the city hall really came to confirm it. Unexpectedly, in the blink of an eye, Sif had been kidnapped. Kidnapping the only daughter of the Suki family in Rolling Stone Town was too outrageous. The other party was really daring. Either it had been planned for a long time, or they were simply mad. Even Ronan's title of Great Mage couldn't suppress this madness. How crazy was this? Matthew felt deeply uneasy for Sif. Unfortunately, he did not have any clues about the kidnappers. Divination was not his forte. I'm afraid I can't help. He closed the door. Matthew sighed softly. The towering skeleton's voice came from the kitchen. Dinner is ready. Matthew was about to go over. Suddenly, a white light flashed in front of him. An oak tree fairy rushed towards him in a panic. What's wrong? Matthew listened to the fairy's complaints. His expression became more and more serious. Someone set the fire. It's almost near the oak forest. Chapter 6. Arsonist. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Matthew rushed into the room. He began to change his clothes as quickly as possible. You have equipped Mist Robe, +1. Mist Robe, Armor +0. Casting Speed +10%, slightly increases mental power recovery speed. You have equipped Withered Wood Staff. Withered Wood Staff, Attack +1. Undead Summoning +1, you have equipped the Magical Bag. Magical Bag. Contained 8 slots. Each slot can store up to 12 items of the same type. Currently stored items. Rotten Spore / Phantom Butterfly / Scrolls, after changing into a completely different outfit. Matthew's entire temperament changed. Normally, he was more like a young teacher who was easy to talk to. But now, he was one step closer to the typical necromancer in the public's mind. Dinner is ready. Peggy walked over with a pot of fried mushroom noodles. I'll eat when I come back, Matthew said as he hurried into the night. 10 minutes later, Matthew's figure appeared at the edge of the oak forest. The only thing that accompanied him was a mage fire used for illumination. His expression did not look too good. The appearance of the suspected arsonist had greatly threatened his most important resource. He was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. In an instant, he became furious. According to normal logic, he should go to the police station for help. However, Matthew considered that Blake must be busy with Sif's matter and might not be able to free up his hands to take care of Matthew's matters. Secondly, he wanted to punish this audacious arsonist personally. This is the forest that I painstakingly cultivated. It's not like any Tom, Dick, or Harry can come and ruin it for me. At the edge of the oak forest, Matthew stood on his tiptoes and looked into the distance. From here, he could indeed see a large fire. The fire had not spread to the oak forest for the time being. Fortunately, there was no flammable fuel in this area. He calmed himself down and realized that the place where the fire was burning seemed to be a farm. There was only a hill between the oak forest and that place. Matthew had met the owner of the farm a few times, and his daughter was very cute. The fire on the farm was so fierce, but there was no shout nearby. It was not difficult to guess what happened to the farm owner's family. They are not ordinary bandits. Matthew calmed down. The oak fairy told him that there were many arsonists, and they exuded an evil and powerful aura. This meant that there was a high probability that it was done by adventurers. He could not act rashly when the enemy's combat strength was unknown. Thus, he observed for a while. Then, he quickly ran to the other end of the oak forest. Very quickly, Matthew arrived at the location in his memory. It was a huge haystack. Below the haystack, there was a place that looked like a cellar. The cellar was not very spacious. The layout was a little like Matthew's university dormitory in his previous life. Puff. Matthew opened the iron lid. He sensed it. Then, he began to use the undead summoning. Under the guidance of magic power. Out of the blue, a ghastly white hand slammed onto the mud floor at the cellar's exit. Immediately after, one skeleton after another crawled out of the hole. Not long after, At the edge of the haystack, there were 12 skeleton soldiers with pale green soul flames in their heads. Most of these skeleton soldiers had thick bones and high integrity. They also held weapons and small round shields. They were the elites of skeleton soldiers. They were all summoned creatures that Matthew had carefully collected. It took him a lot of effort to make them look like they did now. One had to know that undead summoning was not something that came out of nothing. No matter how powerful a necromancer was, it was impossible for them to conjure a team of skeleton soldiers out of thin air. Summoning undead required materials. Take the skeleton soldiers as an example. Summoning them required a certain number of bones. If the number were insufficient, even if the summoning was successful, the skeleton soldiers you summoned would still be missing arms and legs. Not to mention fighting, they might fall apart after taking 2 steps. The reason why skeleton soldiers were synonymous with cannon fodder was because the materials they needed were relatively easy to obtain. The others, such as dark warriors, blood demons, bone dragons, and soul eaters, were thousands of times more difficult to summon. Of course. There was also a way to bypass the casting materials and obtain the summoned creature. That was to build a magic circle that pointed to the negative energy plane. One could directly pull the subjects over from the other side. However, the amount of resources consumed was even more shocking. Even a high-level mage would weigh the pros and cons before constructing such a magic circle. Therefore, generally speaking, it was not without reason that necromancers with low morals preferred to wander around a cemetery and mass graves. They were really poor. And someone like Matthew, who had bought almost every bone in the cellar with his own money or picked it up by accident, was definitely a saint among necromancers. "Let's go," Matthew ordered. The skeleton soldiers, who were slightly slow to react, slowly followed him. Waves of cold air began to spread. In the oak forest, even the noisy night wind became silent. It seemed that even they were afraid of the arrival of the undead. Boom! A violent flame exploded in the farmland. The strong wind blew, adding fuel to the fire. He watched as the farm gradually disappeared into the sea of fire. Heiss, who was wearing a black singlet and revealing his muscles, revealed a smile that came from the bottom of his heart. He suppressed the thought of continuing to set the fire. He shifted his gaze to the dark forest not far away. Fine's information seems to be true. Rolling Stone Town is defenseless at a time like this. Then let me bestow them with a little more shock with the flames. He strode towards the hillside. Behind him, the 6 followers followed him. "Is everything arranged?" Heiss asked indifferently. "Boss, don't worry. Not a single one survived. They were all burned alive." One of the scarred faces revealed a sinister smile. Heiss nodded in satisfaction. As a level .11 arsonist, he could feel that his strength had increased a little. Not much. But it was clearly visible. In fact, according to the original plan, he should have retreated after burning the farm, but the feeling of having his strength increased made him extremely intoxicated. Especially when he noticed the oak forest in front of him, he immediately changed his mind. He could feel the exuberant vitality contained in this forest. Burning this forest would bring him a great increase in strength. That was about 10 times the size of the farm. It was almost the same as burning down a street in a city. However, the risk was far lower than setting fire to the city. No arsonist could resist such a temptation. In particular, Heiss could clearly sense that as long as he burned this forest, the path of flame that was originally very vague for him would become clear. He could no longer hold back his crazy thoughts. Set fire. Set fire. He wanted to burn it. Burn. Burn. Stop. They walked halfway up the hill. Heiss suddenly shouted. The 6 attendants immediately surrounded him vigilantly. "Boss, what's wrong? Do you want to retreat?" Scarface asked. Heiss ignored him. He just stared straight ahead with his eyes wide open. The night breeze brought along a faint green fluorescent light. There was a faint smell of decay in the air. It's a bone flame. Heiss looked thoughtfully at the row of figures slowly appearing on the hillside. Skeleton soldiers. A necromancer. Heiss' furrowed brows immediately relaxed. Did Fine send you here? Go back and tell him that I'll find him after burning this forest. As for whether or not to join the church, that will depend on his sincerity. The skeleton soldiers did not move. The person who was hiding in the dark and controlling these undead creatures did not say anything. Heiss couldn't help but laugh. You're not going to stop me, are you? With these skeletons. His followers also laughed. Scarface volunteered. Boss, I can send all these skeletons flying with a single kick. Heiss shook his head. His gaze searched the hillside. His gaze was extremely sharp. However, he did not act rashly. After a few minutes, his tense state was instantly relieved. The two huge muscles on his chest also trembled. Don't be so mysterious. I found your position. Didn't Fine tell you what I am? Hee, I'm very sensitive to temperature. He looked at the skeleton soldiers and said mockingly, do you necromancers like to hide among the trash? How uncreative. However, the other party still did not answer. Heiss was finally enraged. If you don't get lost, I'll burn you too. As he spoke, a glass bottle that was emitting flames suddenly appeared in his hand. I'm not trying to be mysterious. Finally, a voice came from behind a skeleton soldier. I'm just waiting for the sacks to take effect that you've just inhaled them. Matthew stood on the hill. A large amount of negative energy gushed out from the tip of the withered wood staff. Sack of decay. Acceleration of infection. Not good. Heiss turned around. The followers looked a little panicked. They began to realize that something was wrong. Why is my face a little itchy? The same goes for my arm. It's so itchy. Something seemed to be growing. Under their terrified gazes, some people had red bumps on their skin. At first, these lumps were not eye-catching and did not feel anything. Soon, they became extremely itchy. People simply couldn't control their hands from scratching. He scratched. A large amount of yellow-green pus gushed out from it. Splashes everywhere on his skin. The infection began to grow even faster. As the infected area continued to spread. In the crowd, the aura coming from the negative plane became thicker and thicker. Stop scratching. Kill that necromancer, and you'll be fine. Heiss made a prompt decision and roared. The group endured the itch and charged forward. Matthew continued to wave his staff. This time, he didn't even need to chant. Undead summoning spell. Contract item. Your ability instant summon is in effect. Your ability fixed drop is in effect. On the hill, a large green circle of light appeared in the area where the group was about to rush up. Quickly dodge. Before Heiss could finish, a tall figure descended from the sky. Bang! One of the followers couldn't dodge in time. He was smashed into meat paste. The people beside him were also affected by the shock wave and rolled down the hill. Heiss looked over furiously. The 2-meter tall figure was looking around in a daze. Her bones were white and flawless. But the most eye-catching thing was the plate in her hand. Matthew. Do you want to have dinner? Just nice, I just heated up the fried mushroom noodles again. Peggy looked at Matthew happily. No, throw away the fried noodles, Peggy. I want you to fight for me. Matthew said. Peggy's mood suddenly became serious. She turned to face the arsonist. Then, she said to Matthew, in that case, please buff me. Chapter 7. Necromancer's Weakness. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Necromancer's Weakness. On the hillside. The 2-meter-tall Tauran skeleton stood proudly. Heiss stared at Peggy with a malicious expression. She was different from skeleton soldiers. Peggy's bones were much better in terms of color and texture. Especially the bones in her waist and legs. The entire thing had a dark gold color. This color appeared especially mysterious and powerful against the night sky. Matthew did not hesitate. One by one, he took out magic scrolls from his magical bag. Then, he tore it up without hesitation. In just a few seconds, one after another, strengthening spells were cast on the Tauran skeleton. Bear's tenacity, the strength of a wild bull, the elegance of a cat, the owl's wisdom, sword and sword protection, negative energy shield, considering the enemy's occupation. Matthew had even spent a lot of money to give Peggy a valuable, heat-resistant ring. This would grant her immunity to fire for a short period of time. Arcane halos descended. These strengthening spells pushed Peggy's combat power, which was originally just a little over Tier 3, to the peak of Tier 3. She looked like she was not to be trifled with. However, she was still not satisfied. That's it. Where is buff of Eagle Prestige? Where is the buff of the Cunning Fox? Why didn't you go all out? Matthew waved his hand. I don't have enough mana. Of course, this was a lie. In his heart, he was actually thinking, why would a skeleton like you need extra charm and intelligence checks? Let's do it. Let's end this quickly. As they spoke, Matthew began to mobilize his mental power to command the skeletons to move forward. Peggy did not continue asking. Her right hand suddenly reached for her crotch. The sound of a crack. She pulled out her dark golden thigh bone. This bone blade that was half the height of a human was her most handy weapon. Losing this thigh bone would not affect her balance and movement. But with this bone blade, her ability to deal damage would increase by several times. Phew! The bone blade tore through the air. Peggy charged forward. The followers who were originally blocking the front immediately scattered like birds and beasts. Peggy's target was obviously not these small fries. She took a step forward. The distance of more than 10 meters suddenly disappeared. Bang! The bone blade slashed at the short knife that the arsonist had pulled out in a hurry. After successfully parrying the attack, Heiss' body sank a little. The muscles in his chest trembled violently. His eyes revealed a trace of disbelief. In the next second, the short knife, which was obviously of extraordinary quality, started to twist rapidly. Heiss released his hand alertly. Then, he rolled on the ground. A whistling sound brushed past his scalp. Half of his long black hair had been shaved off. In the middle of his head, there was a gap that looked like the Mediterranean Sea. Damn skeletons! Heiss went on a berserk. He rolled continuously to avoid Peggy's pursuit. Puff! 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 3 bottles of red medicine were smashed on the ground in front of him. A wall of fire instantly formed. Matthew had sharp eyes. He saw that it was blazing glue. Don't barge in. He hurriedly reminded her. The flames of the blazing glue were especially fierce. The heat-resistant ring was immune to heat, but it might not be immune to the destructive power of the flames themselves. Peggy didn't get carried away. She calmly avoided the flames and chased after Heiss. However, Heiss was also very cunning. His movement technique was obviously trained in urban street battles. With the help of an incendiary tool, he started to deal with Peggy. The few sneak attacks of the Tauran skeleton were all resolved by him. Very quickly, there were bonfires burning around Peggy. Her space of movement was constantly being compressed. The situation was gradually reversed by Heiss. The arsonist profession is a bit of a counter for me. Matthew silently noted it down. Most arsonists were evil. He would kill any arsonist he met in the future. It was obvious that the flames were effective against the undead. It wasn't just Peggy who was affected. The skeleton soldiers instinctively avoided the places where the flames burned. Heiss had observed this. He immediately berated the remaining lackeys. What are you waiting for? Use the Molotov cocktail to break through the blockade of the bone shards and kill that necromancer. Heiss' calm command greatly encouraged his followers. They were originally in a state of chaos due to the sacks of decay and only knew how to avoid the pursuit of the skeleton soldiers, but now they also reacted. Cover me. Scarface resisted the itch and called out to his companions, that necromancer doesn't have much mana left. As long as we charge over, we can win. The remaining three nodded reluctantly and began to move in groups. The sound of glass bottles shattering became more intense, and the flames surged on the hillside. Fortunately, this area was barren land, so there was no way to form a more ferocious fire. But even so, the movements of the skeleton soldiers were also affected to a certain extent. Scarface used the fire to swerve left and right. Suddenly, he noticed that there was a gap in the skeleton soldiers' movements. There! Scarface shouted. He gripped his dagger tightly and charged forward. The others immediately followed. Whoosh! The night wind blew. The flame that moved sideways had helped him a lot. The gap between the skeleton soldiers became even bigger. Cover me. Scarface charged forward with all his might. The skeleton soldiers on both sides of the road came to defend. However, they were all blocked by Scarface's companion with a fearless attitude. Bang! One of the followers was hit by a skeleton soldier who walked over and hit him with a shield. His head was covered in blood. He staggered and fell. He was still full of hope as he looked at Scarface's blurry figure running away. Scarface would finish the job on their behalf. Chapter 8. Necromancer's Brand. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Necromancer's Brand. I won't let you down. Scarface turned his head to take a look. Then, he began to accelerate. Within a few breaths, he successfully crossed the line of defense built by the skeleton soldiers. That damned necromancer. It was already right in front of him. Go to hell. Scarface grinned as he launched his final charge. However, in the next second, his eyes widened. He saw the necromancer suddenly raise his left hand that had been hidden under his robe. A thin layer of cloth slid down Matthew's arm. Under the moonlight, an exquisite crossbow appeared under the mist robe. The tip of the arrow was still glowing green. Scarface's sinister smile instantly froze. Whoosh! The arrow hit his chest. Scarface, who was sprinting, suddenly staggered. After falling, he rolled down the hill weakly. The crossbow is indeed a reliable partner for spellcasters on their path of growth. Matthew skillfully reloaded the crossbow. The performance of these arsonists exceeded his expectations. Fortunately, he had more than one trick up his sleeve. After getting rid of Scarface, the threat of the small fries disappeared. Under Matthew's command, the skeleton soldiers retreated and pushed forward step by step. The remaining three followers barely managed to meet up with Heiss in a panic. But Peggy had already outflanked him from behind. A solid encirclement was formed. Seeing this scene, Matthew still felt that it was not safe enough. There was actually resistance in the eyes of the enemies. It seemed like the pressure was not enough. Why don't we try the signature move of the necromancer? Matthew cleared his throat. He tried to make an evil and hoarse voice that was described in the online novels he had read before. He, looks like you want to become my servants. He. The effect of this move was surprisingly good. The followers instantly thought of how their bones would be harvested after they died. The will of the followers instantly collapsed. They began to scatter and flee. However, at this moment, the rotting sacs on their bodies had already spread to their skin, and even their eyelids were covered by a thin layer of blood membrane. Because they could not see the road clearly, they could only run like headless flies, which provided great convenience for the skeleton soldiers to clean up the mess. After a while, 3 of Heist's followers were killed one after another. At this point, the only enemy left was Heist the arsonist. Matthew was not careless. This guy was a real third-rank adventurer and most likely an elite. Under normal circumstances, Peggy might not be able to win against him in a 1v1. He chose a more stable ending strategy. Halfway up the hill, the fire gradually died out. Heist glared at Matthew with a bloody face. Behind him was a towering skeleton with a bone blade and terrifying combat strength. In front of him was a team of fully equipped skeleton soldiers. This necromancer's army was enough to take down a small town. But he used it to deal with a single arsonist and his subordinates. Heist felt very aggrieved. He really wanted to ask this necromancer what was wrong with him. However, his rationality told him that this was meaningless. The individual quality of the skeleton soldiers is insufficient. Perhaps we can try to catch them off guard. This thought ran through Heist's mind. But he quickly dismissed it. He looked at the crossbow in the necromancer's hand with fear. A strong sense of unwillingness appeared in his eyes. Whoosh! He scratched his extremely itchy cheek in frustration. In my current state, I can't guarantee that I can kill the enemy with a critical strike. He's lucky. He quickly took 2 steps to the side. It was right next to the almost extinguished wall of fire. Then, he took out a bottle of purple green potion and gulped it down. Coo coo coo. Heist drank very quickly. When there was only half left, he stopped moving. The next time we meet, I will burn your bones and scatter your ashes. He threw out a vicious sentence. Heist turned around and ran down the hill. At that moment, his speed was unbelievably fast. It actually left a long afterimage under the moonlight. Sprint potion. Peggy originally planned to interrupt the other party's action of taking the medicine. However, Heist was unbelievably fast. He was gone before she could get close to him. At this time, the afterimage quickly swept past the towering skeleton. The soul fire in Peggy's head suddenly lit up. Whoosh! The bone blade moved forward. Thrust. The sound of weapons piercing flesh rang. The huge bone blade cut deeply into Heist's shoulder blade. Good prediction. Matthew couldn't help but praise loudly. However, Heist's tenacity was far higher than he had imagined. After taking this attack head-on, he only staggered a little. Then, he continued to run without saying a word. Hey, my leg. Peggy's hand slipped, and she failed to retract her bone. Heist carried it and ran away. Arsonist had an extremely strong ability to escape. Coupled with the help of the advanced sprint potion, it would be very difficult to catch him unless an inescapable net was set up in advance. Heist was very skilled in escaping. Relying on this combination, he had already saved himself several times. He believed that this time would not be an exception. Matthew. Peggy was anxious. You chase after him first. Matthew said calmly. His gaze was locked in the direction where Heist's afterimage had gone. I will not let him escape. Matthew was ready to use his ultimate move. However, at this moment, his body suddenly trembled slightly. Immediately after, a strong desire and hatred surged into his mind. He pondered for 2 seconds. Matthew decisively chanted another spell. Near the farm, Heist slowed down. He was in a terrible state. Peggy's bone blade had almost cut him in half from the back. If it weren't for his high tenacity, he would have been a dead man. But even so, he urgently needed a place to recuperate. There's a fire here, so it's not convenient for the enemy to get close. He thought about it. Heiss decisively barged into the farm. The surroundings were all burning with flames, but to him, it was like returning to his home. Arsonists had extremely high fire resistance. If he were a little careful, an ordinary fire would not pose any threat to him. We're safe for now. He was leaning against a stone house that had been burned beyond recognition. Heiss rested for a while. He looked at the bone blade on his back and frowned. Just as he was thinking about how to deal with his injuries and the pursuers, a mournful roar suddenly pierced his eardrums. Heiss quivered. A sharp pain came from his chest. He turned around in shock. He saw a ghost with a blurry face sticking close to him. In the next second, the specter's claws suddenly pulled out from Heiss' chest. Bang! Bang! The heart that was exposed to the air was still beating vigorously. No! Heiss' desperate cry was stuck in his throat. Because in an instant his vocal cords were torn to shreds by spectral soul. You sensed a powerful resentment. Channeling the resentment, you used undead summoning. You have obtained an extremely resentful ghost, LV8. You killed the arsonist Heiss and his subordinates, preventing the fire from spreading to the forest. You have received the reward, Wilderness Transformation. Chapter 9. The Eye of the Jungle and the Wind of the Oak Tree. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Wilderness Transformation. You have mastered the basic skills of shapeshifters. You can transform into an animal blessed by the wilderness without casting a spell or chanting. You can choose one of the following animals as your wilderness form. Skunk, Raven, Duglawn. Wasn't shape-shifting the unique skill of druids? Matthew was pleasantly surprised. This was most likely caused by the two gaming systems that were fighting against each other. In the end, Matthew chose the Raven as his wilderness form. This was to make up for his shortcomings. All three animals were small beasts and did not occupy a high ecological position in the food chain, so their combat ability was very average. Skunks were more agile. In some more complicated mountains or forests, skunk transformation might help escape, but other than that, it had no other advantages. Matthew wouldn't go so far as to turn into a skunk and squeeze some musk for himself to sell. The Duglawn was a small dragon that looked like a hound. However, the dragon bloodline in these small animals was even thinner than that of the kobolds. Dragon's might and spells were naturally out of the question. Duglawn had a certain storage ability, and there was a natural dimensional space in its abdomen. The size of the space was linked to Duglawn's level. Newborn Duglawn dragon cubs had one dimensional space, and each subsequent level would add one more dimensional space. Each dimensional space was about the size of a medium-sized pumpkin and could store many things. If he had to choose an animal companion, Matthew would choose the Duglawn without hesitation. But this was his own transformation. Turning himself into a mobile storage space would instead make Matthew lose his sense of security. Compared to the two animals, Raven's advantages were self-evident. It could fly. And it was very fast. It was worth it just to travel or escape, not to mention that the Raven also had excellent reconnaissance abilities. The only weakness of this animal was its low HP. Raven only had 1 HP. If you were discovered by an enemy who had the ability to deal with the air, you would easily be knocked out. How can this be so perfect? Matthew was quite satisfied with his new ability. In his impression, many powerful mages would turn into ravens. This was a good sign. He looked at the mission pane. The reward for Wilderness Transformation came from Follow-up Mission 2. Maintaining it is also very important. Other than the new ability, he also received 200 XP. The mission itself had not changed. This meant that this was a long-term and repetitive task, just like planting trees. As long as a threat appears and the defense succeeds, I can obtain a reward. Then, could I attract a threat myself? To farm the rewards. Matthew was just thinking about it. After all, he had no way of determining the system's judgment criteria. If he messed up, it would be a huge loss. In terms of personality, Matthew actually didn't like to fight and kill. He preferred to plant trees slowly and defend passively. It was enough to obtain stable happiness. Chirp, chirp. The oak tree fairies appeared. They surrounded Matthew and sang praises in a high-profile manner, praising his heroic feat of expelling the arsonists. Fairies hated skeleton soldiers. But they liked Matthew very much. This might be the effect of Matthew's extremely high affinity with nature. You have received the blessing of Fairy Princess Lulu. You have obtained a semi-permanent status. Eye of the Forest. You have obtained a semi-permanent status. Wind of the Oak Tree. Eye of the Jungle. When you are in the jungle, your vision will be greatly improved, and you will be able to see what is behind you. Wind of the Oak Tree. When you approach an oak tree, it will release the power of nature to heal your wounds and soothe your soul. Your mana recovery speed will also be greatly increased. When an oak tree fairy lives on the oak tree, the effect of the wind of the oak tree will be doubled. Fairy Princess. Matthew looked curiously into the fairies. In the end, he only saw a flickering shadow. Lulu was very shy. Matthew had only heard of her name from other fairies, but he had never seen her face. However, that night, Lulu took the initiative to show up and give Matthew a blessing. But Matthew still couldn't see her face clearly. Thank you. Matthew expressed his gratitude to the place where the white light disappeared. Eye of the Jungle, and Wind of the Oak Tree, were both very practical. The semi-permanent meant that as long as Fairy Princess Lulu was still alive, they would take effect. According to Matthew's deduction, Lulu should have just become a fairy princess. She was still very young. There was also a chance for her to become a more powerful and long-lived fairy queen as long as nothing happened to the oak forest. In a way, these two semi-permanent statuses were no different from permanent statuses. Matthew comforted the frightened fairies. Then, he walked down the hill. At the edge of the farm. The flames gradually died down. The skeleton soldiers dragged the bodies of the arsonist and his followers together. Peggy was wiping her bone blade. Not far away. A blue halo was floating in a daze. It was a ghost with a blank expression. Until Matthew walked over. Only then did the ghost's eyes gradually regain their luster. Matthew, you helped me. The spectral soul realized what had happened. Matthew raised his withered wooden staff, and a stream of negative energy surged into the ghost's body. The ghost's originally almost intangible spirit body regained a little luster. I'm sorry, Mr. Farmar, I couldn't come earlier. Matthew sighed softly. Farmar was the owner of this farm. He and his family should have died at the hands of those villains. Previously, Matthew had planned to chase after the arsonist. He felt an extremely powerful resentment in the direction of the farm. This resentment was actually growing stronger against the raging fire. It sensed Matthew's presence. So it begged him for a chance to take revenge. Matthew naturally wouldn't refuse. If such a powerful resentment were ignored, it would definitely give birth to a malicious ghost that would kill without blinking. He used the dead summoning to respond to the other party's plea. In the end, Farmar's spirit body was transformed into a powerful specter. Spectral soul's strength depended on his resentment. After his revenge was successful, Farmar's spirit body was greatly weakened. If there was no external interference, he was going to disappear soon. Yesterday was Anthony or Farmar's son's birthday. Our family went to town for half a day and bought a lot of things that children liked. Desserts, candies, butter bread, and strawberries with frost sugar. When I went out this morning, I felt that the omen was bad. My old dog, Hunter, kept barking, but I found him noisy, so I locked him in the warehouse. I should have known that Hunter wouldn't bark for no reason. He's very intelligent. The group of people rushed in. They kidnapped Lena and Anthony and killed the others. I only had a pitchfork in my hand, and the other men were defenseless. We relied on the warehouse to resist for a while. I couldn't even buy them enough time to escape into the cellar. Damn it. Farmar rambled on. Matthew listened in silence. This was a very responsible middle-aged man. Almost all he talked about were his family, his brothers, and the farm laborers. His face was full of longing for life. However, even with Matthew injecting negative energy into him, his life as a ghost was about to come to an end. Unless. Do you want to continue existing in this form? I can help you. Farmar's condition was getting worse and worse. Matthew couldn't help but mention it. Farmar was stunned. He shook his head. No, thank you, Matthew. Thank you for your kindness, but I don't need it. Lena and the children are waiting for me. I should go with them. As he spoke, he looked towards the east. Matthew looked over thoughtfully. His vision suddenly turned gray. Outside the charred stone house, 6 or 7 souls were clustered together. They gazed lovingly at the farmar. That was his family. Matthew also saw that cute little girl. She looked dazed. It was as if she did not know what had happened. I'm leaving, Matthew. There are some of my savings in the cellar behind the mill. Please take them. Farmar's figure gradually disappeared. I only have one wish. Don't let us die without a proper burial, okay? The gray field of vision suddenly disappeared. Farmar and the other souls instantly disappeared. Matthew's temples were pounding violently. You have mastered a new ability, elementary spirit vision, during your encounter and conversation with a ghost. Elementary spirit vision. You can see a corner of the ghost world. Remark. Using this ability will consume a lot of mental energy. Phew, Matthew heaved a sigh of relief. Under normal circumstances, ghosts could only be seen by people when they turned into strong corporeal forms, such as malicious ghosts. Ordinary ghosts couldn't be seen normally. Necromancers could use the spell Spirit Body Perception to capture the traces of souls. However, Spirit Body Perception was a Tier 3 spell. Therefore, necromancers below level 0.8 rarely had ghosts as their summons. Farmar actually had the chance to become a powerful specter. It was just that his resentment dissipated too quickly. If Matthew was an evil necromancer, he could have forced him to sign a contract with him and not kill Heiss or continue to lie to Farmar that Heiss was not dead. This way, he would be able to obtain a spirit with astonishing combat strength. But Matthew wouldn't do something like that. Next was to clean up the battlefield and check the spoils of war. Matthew first cast his gaze at the body of the arsonist, Heiss. He walked over. He touched it without any courtesy or dignity. You have obtained the spoils of war, 400 GP 80 SC, Blazing Glue X3, set, Fiery Dragon Oil X2, bottle, Molotov Cocktail X1, bottle, Ring of Invisibility, unidentified, Silver Frost Brotherhood's Token X1, Secret Letter X1, Muscle Scroll X6, Heightening Scroll X10. Chapter 10. The Dark Knight and the Order of Calamity. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Cleaning up the battlefield was hard work. However, if there were rich spoils of war to take, the situation was different. Matthew grabbed a handful of gold coins and threw them into a small mud jar, then placed them into the dimensional space of the magical bag. The pleasant sound of metal rolling could be heard throughout the entire process. There is no sound more pleasant than this. The arsonist was extremely wealthy. In addition to the one he took from the cellar, Matthew had earned more than 500 gold coins overnight. In the past 3 years, Even when his financial situation was at its best, it was less than 1/10th of what it was now. This money can be used to buy a lot of green liquid. Perhaps I can consider buying a higher level catalyst tool. This meant that many more trees could be planted this spring. Other than gold coins, the wealth of items on Heiss blinded Matthew, a poor villager. Blazing glue, Molotov cocktail, fiery dragon oil, these were all good materials for arson. In a low-level encounter, these items could unleash unimaginable power. Without these items, Matthew would have flattened them long ago. Now, the remaining items were in Matthew's hands. Of course, he wouldn't use them recklessly because the undead were naturally afraid of fire. It was just that he had to be more careful when using it. It wouldn't be good if he hurt his underlings. You have used identification on the ring of invisibility, unidentified. The appraisal was successful, and your identification skill proficiency +10. Ring of invisibility, level 1 rare item. Wear this on your index or middle finger, and you can enter an invisible state at any time. Can be used 9 times per day. Attribute. Perception +1, remark 1/1. When in stealth mode, you cannot move, attack, or cast spells. Otherwise, the invisibility effect will disappear. Remark 2. You still have the ability to collide with the target when you are invisible. If you collide with someone else, the invisibility effect will disappear. This is more like a concealment ring. Matthew looked at the silver white ring with a black snake pattern with great interest. This wondrous item was still far from being a true ring of invisibility. However, it could be used more often and did not require any casting actions. Perception +1, attribute upgrade is also worthy of the identity of a first-grade strange object. He polished the ring. Then, he put it on his middle finger. The rest of the things were a little lackluster. There was still half a bottle of advanced sprint potion left. He could use it for himself in the future. He did not know which city the Silver Frost Brotherhood was from, nor did he know the importance of this token. It was too troublesome to throw it in the junk pile. As for those illusion scrolls, they were even more comical. Matthew did not expect Heiss' shiny muscles to be the effect of an illusion. This guy was actually less than 1.7 meters tall. The flesh on his body was also loose. There were no signs of training at all. Perhaps he thinks that kind of appearance will help him burn, kill, and pillage. Matthew looked up at the arsonist on the ground. Heiss still had the same horrified expression on his face when he died. The knife marks on his shoulder and the hole in his chest made the corpse look even more terrifying. On the surface of the corpse, the dark red spots were still spreading tirelessly. It was the rotten spore that Matthew had previously scattered into the air. After these spores were inhaled by people, it would rapidly form an extremely itchy sac of decay on the surface of the human body. The sac of decay was a creature from the negative plane. It could replenish negative energy for necromancers in battle. Matthew currently has the ability Rotten Sac Mastery. When the level was high, he could also detonate the sac of decay, control the sac of decay, and control the infected through the sac of decay. This was the terrifying aspect of necromancers. Heiss, toughness, and immunity were ridiculously high. His followers had long since succumbed to the infection, but the sacs only appeared on Heiss' body after his death. Crackle. The sacs on Heiss' body popped like fireworks. Low crisp sounds rose and fell. Matthew immediately stopped reading the secret letter. We have to deal with it first, or it will be too ugly. He took out a dark green bottle from his magical bag. Puff. The cork was pulled out. A group of butterflies that were flickering with green light flew out. They flew around Matthew a few times. Then, they impatiently stopped on Heiss and the other corpses. As the green light moved across the surface of the corpse, the dark red marks were mostly gone. This was the phantom butterfly, a creature from the negative energy plane. The phantom butterfly fed on the sac of decay and its spores, making it a good scavenger. Matthew rarely used the sac of decay. Every time he used it, he would definitely use the phantom butterfly to clean up the surrounding environment. This had nothing to do with the system. It was purely his own little obsession with cleanliness. If the rotten spores were allowed to spread, the environment there would soon become similar to the negative energy plane. This was the reason why most necromancers lived in terrible environments. They were not as particular as Matthew. The phantom butterfly only fed on the sac of decay. Once there was insufficient food, it would quickly die. Matthew followed the philosophy of go big or go home. He didn't stop until the fluorescent lights all over the mountain were so green that they were dazzling. Next was the disposal of the bodies of the arsonists. This was Matthew's first time coming into contact with such a complete and fresh corpse. He was still a little nervous when dealing with it. The followers of the 5 arsonists. Except for the one who was smashed into meat paste by Peggy at the beginning. The other 4 could be summoned as zombies. Their physiques were not bad. Scarface even had a chance to become an elite zombie. Matthew used corpse oil and secret water of negative plane to simply embalm their bodies. After that, he ordered the skeleton soldiers to drag the others into his secret cave. Zombies were far more powerful than skeletons. Correspondingly, the process of summoning zombies was much more troublesome than summoning skeletons. He needed to think about it carefully. The corpse of Heist the arsonist was an excellent material. In Bayen City, the corpse of such a third-rank adventurer would definitely be sold at a high price by the necromancers. This was because it was the best material to make a high-level undead summon, the Dark Knight. Matthew did not have the ability to make Dark Knights yet. This was after level 12. And he had not even advanced to that level yet. It was still far away. For now. The options in front of Matthew were as follows. First, store the corpse and take it out when he had the ability to make Dark Knights. Second, transport it to Bayen City and sell it at a high price. Third, turn Heist into a zombie and nurture it into a zombie king. Fourth, bury him in the oak forest to see if there were any gifts of nature. Let's eliminate the second and third first. Matthew's eyes flickered. He did not lack money. Moreover, it was too wasteful to use a tier 3 corpse as a zombie. It was not easy to nurture a zombie king, and there was a 99% chance that it would be a loss. And between Dark Knight and Gift of Nature, Matthew hesitated for a moment. In the end, he still chose the fourth option. He wasn't coveting Heist's ability. More than that, he wanted to explore the mechanism of nature's gift. If it really doesn't work out, I can dig the body out again. Granted, that will reduce the integrity of the corpse, and the combat power of the Dark Knight will be greatly reduced. Once he made his decision, Matthew no longer hesitated. He found a good place in the oak forest to bury Heist's body. At the same time, he dealt with the victims at the farm. The skeleton soldiers had average fighting abilities, but they were good at manual labor. He found a piece of barren land to the north of the farm and buried everyone. Only then did Matthew have the free time to read the secret letter. A few minutes later, Matthew's expression changed slightly. To like-minded people. The heavenly change was a foregone conclusion. Yurkus had awakened and was watching everyone on this continent. In time, his great power would make the hearts of the world tremble. The structure of the world is changing. In the near future, the heavenly fire and seawater will pour into the inland, and every piece of land we are familiar with will become an endless purgatory. I have received reliable news that the southern guardian Ronan is trapped in the astral plane, the eastern guardian and the evil dragon in the sea have both suffered heavy losses, the western guardian disappeared many years ago, and the northern guardian has never crossed the heavenly chasm mountains. Witherer, evil art master, inheritor of the path of the undead, avenger, red letter hunter, voodoo descendant, arsonist, conspirer. Don't be afraid anymore. This is the time for us to rise up and walk the dark path. We have established a stronghold in the secret area northeast of Rolling Stone Town, and we welcome every brother and sister who has been summoned to come and join us in this great event. Written by Fine, Southern Shepherd of the Order of Calamity. The above was the content of the secret letter. There were also many provocative words in the letter. The general idea was to encourage all kinds of evil adventurers to come out and cause trouble. It was as if there would be no chance if they did not cause trouble then. Matthew was not interested in these things. What he cared about was. The person in the letter claimed to have established a stronghold north of Rolling Stone Town. He was going to hold a blood sacrifice to please the Void ruler, Urkus. And after this blood sacrifice, he would obtain supreme power and could easily flatten Rolling Stone Town. He would also attract the heavenly fire and burn everything. Burn everything. Matthew frowned deeply. This heretic cult believer called Fine was more or less reckless. The truth was clear. Bloody robes in the karst cave, Sif. Suki's kidnapping, the arrival of the arsonist, the intercepted merchant, all of this pointed to Fine and the Order of Calamity. Matthew looked at the mission panel. As expected. After he finished reading the secret letter, the mission changed. Follow-up Mission 2. Maintaining is also important. Description. A new forest is easily destroyed by an accident. Please protect your forest well. Progress Update 1. You have killed the arsonist Heiss and his subordinates, preventing the fire from spreading to the forest in time. You have received the reward, Wilderness Transformation, Progress Update 2. You realize that the arrival of Fine and the Church of Calamity will not only pose a great threat to the security of Rolling Stone Town but will also endanger the forest that you have painstakingly planted. You can't stand the threat that's so close to you. Please destroy them as soon as possible. Quest target. Fine, level 12 Warlock, and his companions. Mission reward. Spell, rapid growth and the entrance ticket to the Moonlight Society.